Greetings, everyone. I called the meeting to order of the Policy and Finance Committee, convening this day, November 5th at 4 p.m. We've got a pretty short agenda, so we'll see how we go here. I don't have a name by the CIP/CIB, but I'm assuming it's you, Mr. Whitaker, or
It's me.
it's you?
Actually, yes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, I am going to pass around 4 sets of handouts here for you. I'll just bring them around, actually. How are you today?
I'll figure it out. Thank you. That's good. I got it. Oops. Goodness.
All right.
Thank you.
We're embarking on a change in the way that the city approaches its capital improvement plan for a couple reasons. The primary reason, I think, is that it's very, very hard to do, in my mind, to have a good conversation about capital improvement budgeting when you've already set the operating budget. So we've established the fiscal 14 operating budget, and this is the traditional time of year where we would be coming before you to talk about how we're going to pay for capital improvements, which seems to me is backwards. It seems to me that the process would be better served to have the conversation about capital improvements, some of the largest dollar items that we spend, earlier in the spring before we start talking about the operating budget, so that we can take the outcome of the capital improvement program and build that into the operating budget. So we have this constant dialogue about how much debt is too much, whether we should cash finance things or debt finance things. If we talk about those kinds of decisions before the operating budget, then when we get to the operating budget, we can include those factors in the operating budget itself. So we're proposing a shift in the timing, which is one of the most important changes. We're also proposing to integrate rating and ranking with city priorities into the way that capital projects are recommended to you. So staff has worked together across a variety of departments to look at rating and ranking criteria that connect with the city's comprehensive plan, that connect with other city goals, to look at things like, how does this capital program improve our ability to respond and implement our neighborhood plans, and those kinds of questions. How do we fund these projects? Project that receives funding that is outside of the city's normal budget process, a grant or something like that, may receive a higher rating than one that's going to cause us to have to issue general obligation bonds. The city historically has had a 5-year capital improvement program and a 2-year capital improvement budget. And for many projects, that works just fine. For large public works projects, which require the acquisition of right-of-way, the relocation of utilities, a bidding process, and then finally construction, that window is actually not wide enough. So we're proposing to increase the capital improvement budget portion from 2 years to 3 years to allow us to get those large-scale, mostly public works, street-type projects in place sooner rather than later. We're hoping to streamline the approval process related to each project, so the city council might see a single project come before it a number of times in the life of that project. And certainly I would imagine it's burdensome on your agenda, and it seems like we're constantly coming back and having the same dialogue over and over and over about a project where the information doesn't change. So our hope is to integrate the approval of the CIP with the approval of those project budgets in relatively short order, so that you're acting on a project budget right after the time where you've had dialogue and debate about what priority that particular project should have in its life cycle, how it should be paid for, and those kinds of things, rather than a year down the road when nobody remembers what the conversation was about or why we picked that project versus the other project. We want to provide more definition to how a project graduates from pie-in-the-sky conceptual idea to actually being funded. So we have a multi-year CIP. The idea would be that as projects become more seasoned, as conceptual plans are completed, as third-party funding sources are firmed up, as council support is gained, as community input is gathered, that those projects would go from the back end of the CIP, year 5, to move closer to being funded and finally implemented. There may be some projects that never make it because they can't gain the community support, or they can't rise in the priority process high enough to get funded with bond finance, or they can't get that third-party source of funding, whatever it is. And so we're providing a little bit of rigor in that process to make sure that projects move in a nice progression from idea to funding. So the result of all that transition idea is our proposal for fiscal 14 is to effectively not make any changes to the capital improvement budget that the council adopted last year. And so the spreadsheet that we provided to you with the purple band at the top, 3 pages long, this one, shows projects that were previously approved by the city council. We have no changes to those, and we're recommending that effectively a ratification of that by saying, hey, we showed this to you, you've already approved it, no further action is necessary. That's the sum total of our fiscal 14 capital improvement process. We have already started the internal planning process related to the 2015 CIP by asking departments to pull together their recommended projects to be included in the next 5-year CIP. Those projects will be accumulated, put through our rating and ranking scheme, which frankly is going to take us a couple cycles to get right. I think, we're going to have to test it and try it and see how that fits. The proposed CIP would then be reviewed by the Planning Commission for how well that CIP comports with the community's comprehensive plan and how well it integrates with the neighborhood plans, and then would finally come to the council in the spring for discussion and adoption. So we'd anticipate that would occur shortly before really we start talking about the annual operating budget. That also gives us the ability, excuse me, if there's a large-scale project that we really are concerned about related to the implementation of, we had a lot of discussion about the new fire station. How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to fund it? Gives the council the ability to say, look, we think this project makes a lot of sense. Maybe we give it conditional approval in March or April when we look at the CIP, but we're going to reserve final judgment until we get through the operating budget process. And then we've got the ability to say, hey, this works. We think we can make it work. We think bond finance works, or we're going to carve some money out of the operating budget to pay for it, or however the case is, to finalize that. And that's really the idea, is to integrate these two processes in a manner, because right now I just think they're out of phase. It puts the council in a tough spot related to funding projects when you've already adopted the budget. So what you have before you is a presentation that basically gives you the bullet points that I just talked through. A document called Capital Improvement Budget and Plan Process, which gives you the timeline that I just discussed related to how that 2015 to 2019 CIP will be implemented. I mentioned the progression, kind of the graduation of projects from year to year. There's a document called Capital Improvement Plan, roll of each year, which gives you a sense of what a year 5 project looks like, what a year 4 project looks like, and those kinds of things. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for any questions that the committee might have.
Do we have any questions? Yes. Councilman Everhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I understand where you're going with this, but, just knowing how we currently operate with things, and we have this plan, like for road projects, maybe all the way out to 2019, even if they don't show up on what we're looking at. Would this change that? I mean, are those, if they've already been approved and they're in a plan currently, like you're talking about, there wouldn't be any changes for 2014, but there might be on down the road. I guess what I'm concerned about is if you have like the project that people in my district have been fighting for many, many years on California Avenue from 33rd all the way to 45th. That's, you know, it's like starts in 2014 but runs all the way through 2019. Well, if we make these changes, does that mean, I mean, I suppose these things could be taken out now, but I just want to know how that would affect a long-term project when we make a change like this.
Yeah, I'd respond to that in two ways. I think, number one, just pick a general project, not the one particularly in your district. That was in the 5-year plan that the council adopted last year. I would anticipate that everything's basically in play as we go through that rating and ranking process to see how things turn out. Now, ultimately, this body determines the prioritization, but we're going to give you our thoughts related to these criteria. With respect to multi-phase projects, I think there has to be an agreement on the body, among the body, that if you're committing to phase 1, you're very likely committing to phase 2 and phase 3 and phase 4 if those are linked together. And so I think that those kinds of projects where they're being phased because we can't get the whole project complete in a construction season, rather than, oh, we think we're going to do this someday, is probably one where you look at that as a single project, where you're really approving kind of the life cycle project rather than the pieces of it.
So in that sense, while this process may change, we're still going to have the big picture overall of, and then, as I said, you know, I understand that something could be taken out even currently now if the council changed its mind on something, but so that the basic process doesn't change, it's sort of timing, is
Yeah,
that?
I think
Okay.
that's fair, and maybe a little bit more rationalization as to why projects get funded and why they don't.
In the
Or-
first place,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeff, I want to follow this as to when you made the comment that it's not in the operating budget and we don't have to make a decision on a capital improvement project at the point, so it's not going to be, it's going to make the budget process a little bit more efficient, so that if there is something in a 5-year plan, it doesn't have to be in that operating budget that we're voting on, or I'm
No.
not sure how to follow that.
Sure. My argument for moving the timing is that every capital project has an operating budget impact. If you widen a street, it's going to cost you more to maintain it, to plow the streets and those kinds of things. And we ought to be thinking about the life cycle cost of those capital projects. The other thing that putting capital ahead of operating allows you to do is to make a decision that we think we want to fund this particular project with cash rather than with debt. And then you get into the operating budget and you already have that knowledge that, oh, we all agreed in the capital improvement program that we were going to finance this with cash. Well, you still have the ability as a body at that point to say, we can't do it. We can't make the decisions we need to on the operating budget to fit this capital. Maybe we have to fund part with debt and part with cash. At that point, it's not too late to do it. But if you do it the way we have now, we've set the operating budget, and at this point, if you decided that you wanted to fund a project with cash rather than debt, you have no mechanism to do so because your operating budget's already set. So I think it gives the council a lot more flexibility with respect to how it funds capital projects, and also brings a little bit more focus to the fact that these projects aren't free once they're constructed.
I commend you for it, because the budget process to me was really almost down and dirty, if you want to, I mean, it was just so fast, and I think this would help, you know, try to understand where the money's coming from and where it's going and what the projects are. I always ask, is this what other cities our size are doing, or do you know if this is the way it's done?
So almost every large community has a multi-year capital program, and I find it very odd the way the city currently does it, where the CIP comes after the operating budget. I think it's very common to see CIP integrated in the operating budget. And it maybe we decide after we go through this first one that it's one more thing we want to add to the agenda for summer discussions. That seems like a lot to me, considering how much time we spent on the operating budget this year. But I think putting those in close succession allows a better integration. But yeah, I think you would find if you looked at other communities our size around the region that they have multi-year CIPs and they do them more or less concurrently with their operating budget.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I think this is a step in the right direction. Obviously, efficiencies over time have been a concern of mine, and whether or not there's good rationale for why we do a project or don't do a project, I think is pretty important. One thing that I've heard people discuss, and I really don't know how this would impact that, but because we know we're guaranteed our revenue from sales tax, at least through the span of the tax, will this allow us to plan in a little bit different way in that we might be able to get materials cheaper at a more advanced time versus, because one of the concerns I've always had is that we've got this sales tax, so we know the revenue is going to be realized.
Right.
The price of road construction is only going to go up year to year. Obviously, the price of bond financing is only going to probably go up because it can't go much lower.
Right.
So to me, it makes the short game would be to invest in our infrastructure now while the price is right versus delay and wait until we're going to pay even more for the project.
Absolutely. We had another Kansas community client that very rarely does debt at all. And they basically looked at taking 3 years of capital investments in their street and borrowing that and funding that at one time. And they got $9 million of projects for $8 million. I mean, that's
Yeah.
exactly the kind of dynamic you're talking about. And, we do have the ability to do that. I mean, that sales tax is reasonably predictable. We know when the sunset's going to come. And I think it's a perfectly reasonable question to say, should we accelerate a portion of that? Now, the next question, the next question is, if we make the funds available, do we have enough horsepower to construct those
Absolutely,
projects and
yeah.
do it in such a way where we don't end up constructing them along the same timeline that we would have otherwise? But yeah, I think it's a great tool that we have to take advantage of current market conditions, which our contractors are hungry. Bond finance is still reasonably inexpensive, and we know that money's going to come.
Yeah, and I think that it speaks to, maybe in terms of the horsepower, one of the issues is that we don't incentivize projects well enough. I don't know. But if contractors have issues finishing on time, well, then maybe we're not giving them the right reasons to finish on time.
And we have an internal capacity issue as well, and Doug only has so many folks that are doing construction inspection and those kinds of things, engineering. So, some of this is just making sure that we're not going to finance a whole bunch of stuff and then not be able to manage it successfully as well. But your question is perfectly reasonable, and I think a lot of communities have taken advantage of really what are hopefully unique market conditions today to get a lot more bang for the buck on those kinds of projects.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we all wrapped up on that agenda item? All right, we will move forward to presentation of city's financial reports for fiscal year 2013.
Okay.
This is really a wild meeting so far.
So what we're providing to you is what we're recommending as, we're referring to it, and we have referred to it up to this point as a monthly and a quarterly report. As our objective was to provide two bits of information. Number one is, and that would be the blue document that you have here, is where are we at in terms of revenue generation on the year? How are we doing from a general fund perspective and all of the other major funds that we have in the city? So we're looking at the revenue, the expenditures, and then the differential between the two. And the way we structured this is that we took the fiscal year budget that was determined by the governing body, we're identifying at that point of time, the year-to-date, what would that budget number be? And then where are we year-to-date actual? And then we're going to extrapolate and extend that number and identify what we project as the year-end projections. Early in the year, it's just a wild-ass guess. As we get into the last 3 or 4 months, we start doing more fine planning so that we can hit our budget targets going forward. And then we just identify in the last 2 columns what the actual variance is and what the percentage is. At the end of the year, you hopefully come in with a 100% number that we did ideal budgeting. In all honesty, we're hoping that at the end of the year, we always generate more revenue than we anticipated and we spend less money than we anticipated. So in this particular case, we've identified the general fund, the various long-term obligations, other government funds, enterprise funds, the things that really we can manage and have to pay attention to as the year goes on. The bullet points, you see 4 of them there. The idea there is that we're just going to, as we review the report, some things always jump out at you. Some things are interesting. And we want to, at that point, use that bullet point space to explain or to point out that interesting thing. Why are revenues so far up or so far down, or what's happening that is having some sort of impact on our finances at that point. And then the bottom graph, as you see, just graphically presents where we are in the general fund, comparing the year-to-date to the actuals or remaining percent. So that's, and I know I'm jumping through this real fast, and I want to go back and have you guys give an opportunity, but I want to compare the 2 reports. So this first one is a real look at all of the funds. The second report, which is named the monthly report, that report was named the quarterly report. The monthly report provides that same information about where we're at from the general fund fiscal year budget, year-to-date actuals, and year-end projections, same as we talked about. It provides some bullet points which kind of tell the story in a little bit more detail. It provides the graph showing the year-to-date actuals versus the budget. And then in the bottom, this is the stuff that people were really looking for. It breaks down each of the departments within the city. And it shows you what the annual budget was, what the year-to-date budget was, and allows you to see that larger tranche of information broken down into smaller groups so that you can identify how each department is. If your interest is police or fire, you can see how police is doing vis-a-vis the budget and their actual performance. Or if you're interested in looking at any particular department, you can see this. And as you see in this particular, on the green report, under the non-departmental, you see a fairly significant minus number. We would then explain what that is in the notes or be available to explain what's going on. So some of those things are timing. Some of those things didn't work out the way we anticipated. You need to have confidence in this management team that we're watching the dollars and we're watching the programming, and that we're not going to find ourselves in a surprise situation. So the only thing I'll say is we call this monthly report and quarterly report. I think there's no reason we can't provide both of these formats on a monthly basis. We tried to design a report that we could easily go into our own financial system and run a report and not make a tremendous amount of individual handwork associated with it. Jeff, any thoughts or comments? Did I come close to getting that right?
You did. I would say on the blue report, the report marked quarterly, you'll see one column there, year-end projection that is populated for the general fund and not populated for the others. And I think as we do this more, we'll be populating the rest of these. Obviously, our concern with general fund, the focus on the general fund really has been to make sure that we end in a positive position there. We spent a lot of time on that. We've got the best feel and flavor for how we think we're going to end there. But on future reports, we'll be populating the rest of that column as well with additional projections. takes a little time to do year-end projections for 50 different funds. So we focused on the one that, for at least this presentation, that we know that everybody's concerned about.
So that concludes our presentation, and we're available to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Denise? Or Lillian, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The hot seat, it's got to me.
This is fabulous. And so to the council, we're going to expect this on a monthly basis, the one that says monthly financial report, and then we're going to get the quarterly?
I think we're gonna do the
Report.
quarterly, monthly. There's no reason, I was just talking to Sean, and I think she said it was okay for me to do this, that we could provide the, both reports, both formats on a monthly basis.
Okay.
The original idea is that we would just track, when we started this conversation, we talked about just tracking revenue and expenses to make sure that this whole thing called the City of Topeka was operating financially in a good position. And then we were gonna provide more specific information about each of the departments. But we've been spending a lot of time automating our finances and also our policies to match our IT capabilities. By the time we were done, we figured out we can provide both of those pieces of information on a regular basis. So we would just provide a 2-page report, maybe a front and back report that provides both the overall fund review and each of the departments.
And then we'd have the opportunity to, like with this non-departmental, exceeded the budget by $241,000 for a facilities project that concluded in 2013. What was that?
And you would have the opportunity to ask that question.
Yeah.
And hopefully, and that's why those bullet points are important, that we would be able to make reference to those things that the things that jump out to you are obviously the things that if we're doing our job, jump out to us. Hopefully, we have the answers, and we can anticipate that question and provide
Okay.
that. But it does, as has been indicated, this body has felt that the information was lagging and coming to them. We want to make sure that it's out there very quickly in the most transparent way. A lot of this information, all of this information has always been available online, but not as easy to get to. What we want to do is make it very easy for you to manage your portion of the city.
And I think there's been other council members that have said, you know, when we exceed the budget, that's a problem. So if we get to see this on a monthly basis, we're going to see when we're exceeding the budget on something.
Right, and we will learn over the period of years as to how the business operation called the City of Topeka flows from a financial perspective. You will see that some revenue comes in a large tranche at some point, and things will look like we have way too much money, or we don't have enough money. But with understanding, we'll start to fine tune our budgeting practices too, so that we're not treating everything as 1/12 of the whole. We understand that in this month and this month, major financial activities are going to occur.
Thank you.
Councilwoman, questions? Again, this is a step in the right direction. When I look at this, are there issues with the risk fund, or am I just reading that wrong? Because I'm not a numbers person. I think I've said that several times.
Well, you're
So-
chairing the right committee.
On the risk funds, so these are primarily insurance funds, health insurance, and other types of property casualty insurance, those can work comp. We guess to put those budgets together. You know, the city's primarily self-insured in most of those funds. We guess we're actually going to be back before the council, later this month, I think, on the regular agenda, seeking budget amendments for a number of those risk funds. We've historically done that at the end of the year where we come back and just true those things up. So in some cases, this is just that, you know, we guessed wrong. We'll let you know when there's a problem. Things actually, you know, health insurance was an example from a few years ago that was a large problem. That fund continues to be pretty healthy. So, and as I mentioned, you know, Jim offered to produce this monthly. It's unlikely that we will be able to do year-end projections for each fund, but it's something that we'll watch pretty closely. You know, in the first 3 months of the year, you don't know anything. You may have a sense of whether your expenditures are on track or not. But I can tell you right now, and really for the last 2 months in the general fund, we meet every other week to review how revenues are coming in, how expenditures are tracking. We're watching very, very closely to make sure that we end up in the neighborhood of the number you see here, which is awesome. It's really, really good news.
We anticipate and hope that we never have a year like 2013 ever again, from a financial management perspective. We started in a very bad place. There are certain decisions that were made in terms of taking money from the debt service fund. A lot of decisions were made, and they were viable decisions at the time. Unfortunately, given what happened with the rating agencies and everything else that's happening within the city, we needed to address issues, and we addressed it in a very aggressive manner. What we're really hoping and anticipating is that the 2014 budget sets us on solid footing, that we can start building that, the reserve, the general fund balance up and get it into a more reasonable number that will be interpreted in a positive manner by the rating agencies.
Makes sense to me. The other one that stands out to me is Parks and Rec. We're overextended on that.
Parks and Rec, the issue there is that not only are we obligated contractually to send Parks and Recreation what we've agreed to in our transfer agreement, or whatever that document's called when we moved Parks and Rec over, but also to pay over the portion of the special alcohol tax that relates to Parks and Rec. That item did not make it in the budget, so it's over here because the expenditure didn't exist in the original fiscal 13 budget. So it's one of those challenges that we've had to overcome. At the end of the day, again, you look at the balance that, or the net income that we're projecting for general fund at the end of the year. We've worked very hard to overcome some significant challenges to get to a point where we're hopefully going to end positive, and not just a little positive, but strongly positive in the general fund.
Do you currently have any idea when we're going to start to realize a positive impact from Parks and Rec
From Parks and
consolidation?
Rec? It's not something I've analyzed.
I mean, there's lots of negative impacts, but I think from a financial perspective, the argument always was that at some point it would generate resources for us, and I don't feel like that's necessarily played out.
I will say two things. I don't really have a dog in that fight, because I wasn't here, wasn't involved in the decision. I think you probably need another year to let things settle, and then it would be a very good fiscal analysis to undertake to say whether or not that consolidation has been good, not only financially, but has been good from the community perspective as well.
Absolutely. Yes, Councilman Everhart.
Well, and follow-up on that, since that's a pet peeve of mine, is that we gave them all of the buildings, et cetera, all the real estate, but kept all the debt. And as I remember, the debt goes on for what, another 20, 30 years?
It likely wouldn't go any longer than 20 years, but right.
Right, so we're paying the debt, so we're not, this city isn't gonna see a benefit. Now, the taxpayers out there on a whole may think they've seen a benefit, but the city is paying off that debt for 20 years, and that's a big, big dollar amount, so. Thanks.
Anything else? Moving on to agenda item number 3, franchise fee program update.
The council back in 2004, 2005, am I right? When the city increased the charges to its own utilities for administrative overhead and payment in lieu of taxes, implemented a policy where we created a rebate program for those least able to cover the costs of those increases in their own personal budgets. That program has been a particular thorn under my side, because we spend $1 to spend 3, which is just outrageous in my mind. And so what we proposed to the council this summer as part of the budget process was cut the budget for that particular franchise fee program, but don't cut the service. And our commitment to you was to come back with an improved administrative process to deliver those funds to the people who need it in such a way that it costs us way, way less than what we're currently spending. We're making good progress on that. We had hoped to have a proposal to you tonight. We don't have that. We're still working out the kinks. We are exploring a variety of ways to deliver that program, including using nonprofit partners in the community. And the city actually had two programs. We had one program that was general fund funded, and a second program that was related for the same purpose that was funded by utilities. We're trying to integrate those programs as well. So there's a single program. It's administered in a sane way. It doesn't cost us a ridiculous sum to do that, and it gets in the hands of the folks that really do need the assistance with that money. So I'm confident we'll get there. I wish it were tonight, but the clock ran out on us, so I apologize for that.
Any questions? All right. Any other items currently before the committee? Are there any other items? With that, I think we are ready to adjourn. All those in favor? And we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
No speeding.
Right.